Hello, happy day to you. It's another wisdom walk, and today we are exploring fear. Now, I know I've talked about fear before. I'm going to add some layers to fear today because this idea of fear and the resistance, as I call it, keeps coming up. So let's explore that a little bit more and see what we can uncover. Can't wait. Oh, the concept of fear. I had some major fear come up for me recently. For the first time in a few years, I was flying to Mexico, flying out of the country. And let me tell you, a whole bunch of resistance came up for me. I was actually digging my heels in. And I want to share with you what showed up in that experience because I don't know about you guys, but this is not the first time that this has happened to me, where fear has come up and created some resistance. And I'm going to start by just going back a minute to a previous story in which I was on a plane that had an engine explode while we were flying in the air. And it's an interesting story actually about manifestation because on my vision board I had that I wanted to be on national TV. Just not the way I thought it would turn out. So we were on a flight leaving Abbotsford pre-COVID, and we had an airstrike. So we hit a flock of birds. I always want to say flock of seagulls. For those of you that were raised in the 80s, you know the flock of seagulls, what I'm talking about. But it was a flock of geese, and the geese went into, I guess, the turbine, which caused some explosions. It caused that turbine to go up into flames. So we're literally on takeoff in the air, and we hear this thud and then this boom, and then we see smoke and fire coming out of the right side of the plane, which was right where I was sitting. And I thought that was it, man. I was like, okay. I was getting my phone out so that I could message the kids and tell them I loved them. You know, when you experience that, you don't necessarily know the true seriousness of it or the fact that maybe there's another engine. The good news is there's other engines on the plane. And of course, within several painful, fearful moments, the pilot comes on and says, you know, we've got another working engine. We're going to have to turn around and land. And, you know, but we're going to be okay. And so we had that reassurance and we landed. And then, of course, the news was there, and I ended up getting interviewed on national TV. But what was interesting about that experience is that I never had a deep sense of fear with flying before. And since then, I most certainly do. And so when we were planning this trip to go to Mexico, I had a whole lot of resistance. And in that resistance, what was interesting was that the universe was helping me to convince myself that I shouldn't go on this trip, that it wasn't safe. Oh man, everything that could have went wrong, went wrong. And so as we're planning this trip, we decide to fly out of Calgary, which is a few hours drive, instead of flying out of the local airport where we are, because we didn't want to risk stopovers and things like that. But then a snowstorm hit, and so we had to drive down through a blizzard. On the drive down, as I was placing some tea in between my legs as I was getting settled in the car, the tea spilt and gave me second-degree burns on my thighs. So at this point, I'm thinking, oh, we really shouldn't go on this trip. Like, this is a sign. I'm, again, convincing myself that it's not safe to go on this trip. You know, we're driving through a blizzard. I've now got second-degree burns. And on top of that, my son was really sick and I was a bit under the weather as well. I wasn't feeling well. And we get to our airport in Calgary and I've got a migraine headache. I haven't had a migraine headache since I was 10 years old. And that was the only other time I ever had a migraine like this. Just throbbing, pounding to a point of nausea. And again, you know, I'm like, I don't think I can do this trip. I can't do this trip. And so through the night, I had made a decision that I would tell Dan in the morning that he would have to go on the trip by himself. And I would just book the hotel in Calgary so I could stay and do the writing that I had intended to do on my trip. And so the morning came and the headache was mostly gone. And I had this nudge, this voice. And I'm so grateful for the inner nudges of intuition because, you know, I had convinced myself that I shouldn't be getting on this plane and that this was a bad idea. And I had even created storylines inside my head about the things that could go wrong. You know how we do that. You guys do that? And so one of the thoughts that came to me was a stat that I had read recently, and I can't recall exactly where it comes from, but the stat was that 91% of our negative thoughts don't come to fruition. 91%. And so that stat came to my mind in the morning, and I did a check-in. I did a check-in with my heart, and I said, okay, is this actually my intuition telling me that this is a bad idea, or is it my ego that's coming in to say, you've had a previous experience that was traumatic and you are going to do everything you can to stop yourself from going through that trauma again? And of course, the trauma of being on a plane that, you know, explodes in air while you're on it, obviously was playing a factor. And I recognized that this fear that I was creating and the resistance I was creating to this experience was creating this gong show of events, these tricky events that were delaying me. And I kind of came to terms with it in the morning. I still had some hesitancy, but I decided, okay, let's get to the airport and let's see what happens. And then of course we get to the airport, everything goes really smoothly. We get on the plane and we sit on the plane for about an hour and there's complications. So they had some mechanical issues. And so now we're delayed and I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? Back on track to my doubt of this trip. Yeah, no, maybe we really shouldn't go. And then they say, oh, we found another plane, so we're going to be boarding again and going on another plane. So no matter how hard I tried to resist it, in the end, I succumbed and I said, okay, I need to lean into trust that this is going to be exactly what I need it to be, that I can move through this fear and I can face this fear. And so ultimately we arrived on our trip and things continued to go sideways. And I'm thinking like, okay, I've surrendered. I'm here. Why isn't this getting easier for me? And I kept having to remind myself what I had just taught to some of my students, that everything in life is good, even if we perceive it as bad. So here we end up with a room with no balcony and it's got no hot water and things like that. And, you know, at this point, I'm feeling pretty sorry for myself. And I'm thinking like, come on, I pushed through the fear. Why is this happening? And, you know, there's lots of different layers to why it could be happening. But the point is that when I did get the room that, you know, we were meant to get, and it had the balcony and the warm showers, I felt so much more grateful. I came into a deep, deep space of gratitude and appreciation. And if that was just the one reason, I'm sure there's many more, but if that was just the one reason that I had to go through a little bit of shit in order to get to that richness of what I got to experience, it was worth it. It was worth it. And here's the magical part of this whole experience. If I would have allowed myself to stay in the fear and to stay stuck, then the opportunities for miracles wouldn't have taken place. And here's the miracle. I was blessed on day three. And I was doing some writing on the beach, and there was a few women that were sitting next to us, and they asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm writing a book. And they said, oh, you're an author? Yeah, and a speaker. And I didn't say too much else. But then as the conversation carried on, it kind of came out what I really do. I said, well, I'm actually a spiritual teacher. And I don't usually hesitate to fess up to what I do. But in this experience, I was feeling again still just a little bit closed because of all the fear that I had coming up around the trip and just really wanting to kind of create sacred space for myself. But what I realized in that was that it was actually blocking me. It wasn't a boundary. I was actually putting walls up. And so I let the walls down with these women. And the conversation that ensued was absolutely brilliant. And they asked all sorts of spiritual questions. They were all moving through some shift or awakening of some sort, and all women in their 60s, grandmothers on a grandmother's trip without the grandchildren. And one of them had lost her son almost exactly a year ago in a tragic accident. He was 34 years old. And she was grieving, and it just opened up this beautiful healing conversation. And of course, that night, in the middle of the night, actually at like 2:22 a.m., I get a visitor, and it's her son. As a medium intuitive, sometimes people show up for us, past loved ones show up for us unexpectedly. And he came through and gave me all this information. So in the morning, I put it all together in an email and I sent it off to her. And she sent me an email back just saying, oh my gosh, thank you is just, the words aren't enough. This is the greatest gift I've ever received. And just went on to say how much it meant to her. And then when we saw each other on the beach that day, she comes to me, gives me a great big hug. And she said to me, you saved my life. And I was an EMT and firefighter, and I never had anybody say that to me in all those years. And doing spiritual work has been the most rewarding in the sense of being able to hold somebody's hand and say, I've got you, it's going to be okay. And so this was just such a powerful experience. And it hit me hard, and I feel emotional even saying it now, to be told that you saved someone's life. And at first I said, no, you did that on your own. And, humility comes into play and not wanting to take any responsibility. But at the same time, my heart was so touched. And I was reminded yet again that if I would have let the fear take over and not have gone on this trip, maybe this woman wouldn't have had this opportunity at a new look at life and to have deeper healing, and if that was the reason for me to push through fear, well, let me tell you, it was so worth it. So I know that was a long-winded story, but I think it was important to share as it relates to fear, because I think, it's easy for us to make all sorts of excuses like I was making to not go on this trip. And we do this in life, We are afraid to start a business. We're afraid to go our spiritual path. We're afraid to say what needs to be said. And what we don't realize is that when we don't allow ourselves to move through that fear, that we do not allow ourselves the privilege to witness the magic that is created beyond that. And so if we look at fear as just a dark cloud, on the other side is the sunshine. And so when we start to see fear in this way, I got a tricky spot here. When we start to see fear in this way, is this cloud of I just need to get through the cloud. I just need to move through there and trust. And sometimes it feels a little blind, that trust, but this is what the game is about, you guys. This is what life is about. is about leaning into faith and trust that in every given moment, everything is actually working out exactly as it needs to, exactly as it's supposed to. And when we look at this picture of fear, we give fear a bad rap. Fear, But what if fear is the gateway? What if fear is this brilliant opportunity for us to see the glory of life? And so how can we start to move through this fear? And I was watching this documentary. Jonah Hill does a documentary with his psychiatrist, Dr. Stutz. And it was very interesting, by the way. If you're interested, it's called Stutz on Netflix. But Dr. Stutz talks about the three things that every human being has to face. Every single one of us has to deal with pain or suffering, I call it. Every single one of us has to deal with uncertainty. And every single one of us has to endure continuous work. And that might sound a little bit like daunting, but like the truth is that I want to keep working to be better. I want to keep striving to learn more, to grow more. And that requires some work and effort. But everybody is dealt the same hand here. We all have uncertainty, we all have pain, suffering, and we all have continuous work to do. And we get to choose the type of work that it is. We do. And when we say continuous work, this is not continuous work of like getting the job. This is continuous work on allowing ourselves to have a deeper comprehension of who we are, why we're here, and how we get to show up in the world. That's the work. And when we are in doubt, when we are in fear, when we are saying, I don't know what my purpose is, I don't know what my gifts are, I feel really blocked, all the things, the number one thing that you can do for yourself is to do the work inwardly. That is the number one thing that you can do. And so this fear shows up and creates this resistance, which then creates this discomfort and pain. I mean, I was suffering before going on this trip. I wasn't excited about it. I was sick, headache. I burned myself. I mean, all these things were going wrong that created this suffering. And I had to look fear in the face. I had to take action. And taking action can be the inward journey, but taking action can also mean just taking one step. And there's not one step that's necessarily greater than the other, although in our minds we feel like, oh, if I do this thing, it'll get me farther than this or whatever. But really, each step, just like how I'm walking now, each step contributes to the next and contributes to the next. And when we are faced with fear, the opportunity is for us to take that next step, to just take that step, even if it feels a bit scary, and just lean in. And I also use the analogy from, if there's any Indiana Jones fans listening, there's a scene where he has to cross an invisible bridge that he can't see, and he has to trust that it's like next foot in front of the other and that the bridge will be there. And that's a big part of life, where we just have to trust that the next step will get us to where we want to go. And so that's one of the aspects to understanding fear is, it feels scary, and we make it scary in our mind. We make these incredible monsters in our mind. But the reality is that it's not actually so bad once we step in. And one of the techniques that I use is befriending fear. So I make friends with the fear. I talk to the fear. I say, hey, I see you showing up. I'm really frustrated that you're showing up. But you're showing up. So what do you got to teach me? What do you got to show me? What do I need to know about you showing up? And in my own process and getting on that plane, I recognized that I had some major trauma that was still tied to that I needed to look at more closely, and I needed to move through more. I hadn't healed from that experience. And so it showed me that I had work to do. And I'm still in the discovery process about what that work is and what that is tied into. But I do know that it's related to me feeling you know, that I am going to die young. That's a fear that I have, that I'm going to die young. And part of that, of course, would be from my previous near deaths at 5 years old and another near death at 26. So, of course, you know, that fear of dying young shows up for me. And so then it was, okay, well, what is that about, right? And so that's what I'm working on right now, and I'm still in the process of it. But needless to say, befriending the fear will give you the answers. It's about leveraging the fear. And as soon as you pay attention to that, as soon as you leverage the fear, oh my goodness, all of a sudden you glean all this information and knowledge and wisdom. Not only that, but you can move through that fear, get to the other side, feel so empowered, and be in that celebration. So it takes you from one extreme to the next very quickly. So there's something special about that in itself, isn't there? So I know today was a really extra long talk, but I really wanted to have this conversation about fear and what I've been going through and what I've been learning about it. And I hope that it will speak to you, and I hope that it will give you some tools and some ideas to work through. And so continue befriending the fear. Continue to have that trust and that faith that on the other side of that dark fear cloud is the sunshine, because you never know what miracles will occur on the other side of that. So much love to all of you today. Mwah. Bye for now.